everybody. We're so happy that you're here today, and I want to welcome all of you. I want to start out by having you think about your favorite book and why it is your favorite. Was it transformative, mind-blowing, take you to places you've never been, introduce you to people you're not familiar with, new customs, new ways of looking at the world? Now imagine not being able to read that book because someone said you can't. That is what we're going to discuss here today. What happens to a community, to our San Antonio community, when books are banned? This topic is so timely because attempts to ban books are at the highest level since the American Library Association started to track them over 20 years ago. My name is Sharon Mullen, and I'm the chair of today's event. I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to this educational program, sponsored by NCJW and Trinity University. We're so pleased that you're here today to learn, to participate in a sharing of ideas, and to hopefully take action for the good of our community. I would like to take this time to acknowledge everyone who has helped to get us to this afternoon, because as is usually the case with something like this, it truly takes a village, and an organization like NCJW and a partner like Trinity University. For those who may not be familiar with NCJW, let me share a little bit about our organization. NCJW is a volunteer organization that has been at the forefront of social change for over a century. We work to improve the lives of women, children, and families, taking a progressive stance and advocating on such issues as book banning, child welfare, voting rights, and reproductive freedom. There are around 300 NCJW advocates in San Antonio and around 200,000 nationwide. Some of the most notable NCJW contributions to our community over the years have included creating the first free kindergarten in 1908, opening the first school for the blind, which later became the Lighthouse for the Blind in 1952. Founding Child Advocates, now known as CASA, in 1984. To more recent projects, raising awareness of trafficked teens, exploring the actions of so-called free pregnancy clinics, and today's symposium, Don't Mess with Books in Texas. We have some special guests that I would like to acknowledge in our audience today. Rabbi Sam Stahl, Rabbi Emeritus of Temple Bethel, and Wendy Woodland. Is Wendy here? Yay, Wendy. She's the Director of Advocacy and Communications for TLA. At this time, I wish to thank all of our speakers today, Erica Prosper, Carrie Clack, and our panel members who are volunteering their time to be with us and share their insights on this important topic. And now I'd like to introduce one of our co-chairs, Alyssa Levy-Baum.
Hello. I am pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Erica Prosper, who is a woman, an illustrious woman, Latina, leader, and San Antonian who really needs no introduction. Known for being the First Lady of San Antonio, Erica Prosper Neuenberg is a strong, independent civic leader and HEB executive. Erica, who grew up in a migrant worker family in the Rio Grande Valley, has earned 2 undergraduate degrees from the University of Texas at Austin, as well as a master's from the University of Pennsylvania's Annenberg School for Communication. She co-founded and was the 2016 chair of the Latina Leadership Institute and has led the creation of multiple education, youth, entrepreneurship programming, and women's economic development programs. Erica has been named the David Ashworth Community Service Corporate Winner, the San Antonio Business Journal's Woman of the Year, a Governor's Yellow Rose of Texas honoree, and the HEB Linda D. Jimenez Diversity and Inclusion Corporate Awardee. But that's not all. She has also served on the boards of Girl Scouts of Southwest Texas, the Mexican American Civil Rights Institute, the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Art Pace's Chalk It Up, and Say See. Since 2022, Erica has been a yearly regional panelist for the prestigious White House Fellows Program. Her proudest honor, however, was receiving the 2010 Association of Migrant Educators of Texas Migrant Alumni Award. As a co-founder and 2015-16 chair of the Latina Leadership Institute, much of Erica's passion revolves around efforts to help improve quality of life among underserved populations through girls and women empowerment, education and literacy, critical issues in San Antonio that she's worked to address through her service with the Latina Leadership Institute. She and her husband have one son named Jonah. When visiting a local elementary school to talk to second graders, Erica didn't miss the opportunity to tell the students how important school is to their futures, saying, and I quote, "It all starts in a library. A library is where kids go to explore their futures. None of the things you heard about me would have happened without the people in this room, without teachers, librarians, and other people who supported me." Literacy has always been important to Erica. As a child, she was the first in her family to read and write English, and she read to her son Jonah starting when he was in her womb. She notes that literacy is the most powerful thing you can give a child or an adult, which makes her the perfect person to speak about the issue of banning books and why it's so critical that we fight to prevent that from happening. Please welcome Erica Prosper Nierenberg.
What a privilege to be introduced by Alyssa. She was the director of the Early Childhood Center where my son actually went and started when he was 1 year old until he started pre-K, and a wonderful, wonderful experience that she had given him. I have to check first if people can see me. I am a short woman, and sometimes, there we go, sometimes it's not quite easy. I do want to thank every one of you for being here today. Now I'm going to cut to the chase. We're all here because we believe that banning books is wrong. Specifically targeted banning of books to minimize voices of color, the LGBTQA+ community, and other historically marginalized groups. That is wrong. I don't need to blast it on repeat here. I might, but I don't need to. And I certainly don't need to educate the educators on the damage this has already done to the relationship between schools and elected officials, teachers and parents, and the already quickly shrinking pool of the education labor force. I don't need to remind this group that in 2023, the first book study of over 1,500 educators said 72% of them told us restricting book access decreases a student's engagement in reading. And more than a third of these educators noted that book bans discourage students from thinking critically. It incites them with fear to think outside the box. The stats go on and on the damage book bans have on children, on their self-identities, and their worth, let alone the communities that these children come from. Many of you, in fact, are here because of these repercussions. and are welcoming a discussion about them today. What I do want to do is spend some time taking a step back and discussing why books, all books, that have long been taken for granted, are a cornerstone of the American dream. That long-touted benefit of equalization that our young country depends on to keep the peace and keep the pace with other world powers. See, that dream depends on us believing that we can achieve what we want in America. And books are simply access to those beliefs. Books are blueprints on how others accomplished their independent dream. Books are also cautionary tales of how others lost those dreams or worked hard to recapture them. At their fundamental best, books are what makes the American promise tangible, worth fighting for, and precious when accomplished. And books have been an active part and even an accelerant to this American promise. After all, it was the books of John Locke, Charles Montesquieu, Jean-Jacques Rousseau that inspired ideas of a separate democratic country to begin with. And so strong was the belief that our personal identities as Americans were founded on these books that our own government prohibited themselves from abridging our freedom of speech or of our press, including our book presses. Without that freedom, there is no American identity. Now, as you noted, many of you have heard I come from poverty. And in those circumstances, you are often limited in not just resources, but in the world beyond your bubble, which is mostly focused on survival every day. I have long credited, as you heard, books for giving me the ability to look beyond my stressors and to provide perspective, complexities of thought, curiosity in my fellow man and woman, and now, as a mother, an ability to see a future for my own son that doesn't limit him or his chosen partner in life. Books have taught me compassion and exposed me to boundaries that otherwise I would not have been prepared to draw in my young life. I could not depend on my parents to tell me about the world. They didn't know the world. And it was books that guided me every step of the way. I read books that many wanted to ban back then and still do, like Catcher in the Rye, The Chocolate War. In fact, the book Less Than Zero is the reason I never did drugs. That and Robert Downey Jr. I also cannot discount the great impact that M.E. Kerr had with his young adult novels. They exposed me to so many complex issues like classism, the AIDS epidemic, and LGBTQA struggles early in the 80s, long before any adult in my life would even dare bring up these subjects or even knew how to do it. And The Lord of the Rings was the first time I started to really understand loyalty and duty larger than the self. And I have to ask, isn't compassion, aren't complex ideas, critical thinking, exposure to something beyond you, loyalty, and believing in something that you can't see, isn't that American enough? Because it is. Wanting to keep me from those banned books just made them more interesting to me. And in fact, the more controversial, the more my friends and I wanted to read them, even if they had nothing to do with our current life. And that hasn't changed. 78% of the educators in that first book study I mentioned reported that students are reading more when given the choice to read banned books. But the benefits are not just about more reading, which is great in and of itself. A recent diverse books impact study reported that after adding diverse books to their classroom libraries, educators themselves reported that reading scores increased by 3 percentages higher than the national average. And the collective classroom reading time increased by 4 hours on average a week. Classrooms that added bilingual and LGBTQA+ titles had even greater points improvement. This is not about claiming that books that are being banned will withhold our children somehow. This is about acknowledging that it is in exposing them to a world outside of their bubbles will only make them better students and better citizens of an America that depends in the belief that they can access what they want. I do also want to remind us that book banning isn't really new in our country or even in our states. Because if someone wants to control someone else, they will attempt to cut off sources of clarity, of pride, and of inspiration. And there's nothing more powerful than our stories reflected back to us, legitimizing our experiences and our voices. In that way, books are access to hope, and those who seek to ban them fear that spark and that spread. In 1981, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass was threatened by banning by the Boston District's Attorney's Office because he challenged the capitalism that was happening during the Industrial Revolution. In 1885, Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn, a darling of the banning society, has been banned multiple times, in fact, and still has controversy because of the relationship that happened between a white boy and a black slave. And in 1925, Charles Darwin's The Origin of Species was banned in Tennessee until 1967. I could go on, but you get the pattern. Books that seek to bring attention to alternative points of views, alternative truths, and alternative experiences will always be challenged. But I take hope not just from you in the audience, but from Carrie and Dr. Paula and Johnny and Lucy and Sebastian, and even from a little-known project in rural Kentucky during the Great Depression where women librarians rode pack horses to remote parts of Appalachia to deliver books to families that were either cut off from society financially or due to physical hardships. It proves to me that no matter what we face, our stories will always be a coveted and crucial resource that our country craves, even in the middle of Appalachia. That our collective identity needs, and that no one will be able to stop. Today, you're going to hear from these brave people doing their best to help books prevail. And next time you're dismayed by people who benefit from taking your stories, instead I want you to produce more hope and read more books than they can take away from you. And open an entire stack next to your bed like I have of to-be-read books that Ron always trips on. But you can also do other things. You can invest in independent printing presses that are not dependent on state dollars. You can support authors who now self-publish amidst threats. You can pool your money together with friends and gift books that provide guidance to those who now are targeted and feel alone in their journey. You can go to independent bookstores that are proud to carry banned books. You can start your own banned book club or tiny libraries. Set up a free book vendor table at local events and give banned books. Write letters to editors, to your local library directors, and your school principals talking about the freedom to read. And of course, you can vote, 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 vote. Just don't back off. There is no doubt in my mind that books will prevail, even with attempts to silence them. and the people that write them, and the communities they represent. There is no doubt in my mind that books will continue to guide, even if they are maligned and mischaracterized. There is no doubt in my mind that books will outlive and outlast and outwit those that seek to banish them. Why? Because, as an unlikely ally once said, books and ideas are the most effective weapons against intolerance and ignorance. LBJ. And this state's diverse, multicultural, multi-identity, and vibrant Americans. And this state's diverse, multicultural, multi-vibrant, multi-identity Texans are ready with books at hand and allies by their side to say, don't mess with books in Texas. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and read books.
Thanks, Erica, for those inspiring words. Now, I am pleased to introduce as our moderator for this panel one of San Antonio's great authors and columnists. Born and raised in San Antonio, Carrie Clack is a columnist and member of the San Antonio Express-News editorial board. He is a proud graduate of St. George High School and holds a bachelor's degree in political science from St. Mary's University. In the summer of 1984, Carrie was a scholar intern at the Martin Luther King Jr. Center for Nonviolent Social Change, where he studied nonviolence and wrote CNN commentaries for Coretta Scott King. He later returned to Atlanta to teach nonviolence workshops to high school and college students. In 1994, Carrie began writing bi-weekly column in the San Antonio Express-News, where he was hired a year later as a full-time reporter and columnist. In 1998, he became the newspaper and the city's first black editorial board member at any of the city's daily newspapers. Back then, we had 3 newspapers. Can y'all believe that? Carrie has also published works in the New York Times, Texas Monthly, the Texas Observer, and in Truly Adventurous, a digital magazine built with reckless faith in the power of true storytelling. In 2011, he left the Express-News to join Joaquin Castro's first congressional campaign as communications director. Upon Castro's election, Carrie served as the congressman's district director. He also worked for San Antonio Mayor Ivy Taylor as her communications director and for Merced Housing Texas in community engagement. In 2017, Carrie was inducted into the Texas Institute of Letters. After an 8-year journalism hiatus, Mr. Clack returned in 2019 to the San Antonio Express-News as a columnist and an editorial board member. 2 years later, Carrie won the Texas Associated Press Managing Editors Award for Star Opinion Writer of the Year. In 2022, he again won recognition from the prestigious organization for his editorial writing. In 2023, for the 3rd consecutive year, okay, hold on. Sorry about that, okay. In 2023, for the 3rd consecutive year, Carrie was recognized again by the Texas Associated Press Managing Editors, receiving awards for editorial writing and general column writing. He is the co-chair of the Coretta Scott King Interns Alumni Association, which was recently announced by Bernice King. Carrie has published 2 books, Clowns and Rats Scare Me, a collection of columns published in 2009 by Trinity University Press, and More Finish Lines to Cross, Notes on Race, Redemption, and Hope, published earlier this year by Trinity University Press. Carrie has also edited the first anthology of Black Texas writers, Deep in the Soul of Texas, which will be published by Texas A&M University Press in 2025. Now, please help me welcome Mr. Kerry Clack.
I'm sorry about the lengthy introduction. It took up all the time. It was great seeing you. I don't go to church as often as I should. I haven't gone in a while, but I feel like after Erica, I've went to church just a few minutes ago, so amen. I am going to go straight to the introductions about panels. I know a lot of times when people do introductions, they say wait until we've introduced all of them. But after I introduce each one, go ahead and give them an applause. So, okay. And thanks for being here this afternoon. Dr. Pauline Johnson earned her doctorate in interdisciplinary learning and teaching from the University of Texas at San Antonio. Paula led the federally funded Equity Assistance Center at IDRA for many years, serving the southern region of the United States. She's worked with state and local education leaders to build bridges among administrators, teachers, parents, students, and community members to find systemic and equitable solutions where all students can be academically successful. Dr. Johnson currently serves as the Chief of Student Advocacy for the Judson Independent School District. In addition, she is currently an adjunct mathematics instructor at Prairie View A&M University. Paula's 29 years of service in education in Texas public school districts have included positions as a secondary math teacher, curriculum specialist, department chair, academic coach, and special programs coordinator. Paula Johnson. Johnny Garzavia is a product of the great state of Texas, a Sagittarius sun, Capricorn everything else. He is an award-winning author of contemporary young adult novels inspired by their own Tejana and Chicana and queer identities, including the Pura Belpre Honor book, 1,500 Miles from the Sun, the Stonewall Honor book, Anda and Santi Were Here, and most recently, Canto Contigo. When not writing, Johnny enjoys reading, playing Dungeons and Dragons, cooking, listening to Selena, caring for the handful of plant children, and rewatching their favorite sessions of Dimension 20. Johnny lives in San Antonio. Johnny's up. Lucy Podmore has served as a school librarian since 2007 in San Antonio and is an active member of the Texas Library Association and Texas Association of School Librarians, currently serving as past chair of TASL. Lucy has presented at various district, state, and international conferences and has twice been selected as Educator of the Year, as well as TCEA's Library Media Specialist of the Year in 2014-15. As a Hispanic woman working in a diverse community, her goal of ensuring her students are represented in library materials and programs is at the center of her work. Lucy. And the real young blood of this panel, Sebastian Padilla is a second-year student at SAC with a major in filmmaking and an interest in politics. While a student at Reagan High School, Northeast ISD, he learned about and became interested in the issue of book banning from his U.S. government class. He took this interest into researching the topic and creating a short documentary film entitled The List of Great Books. He entered this documentary in the UIL competition and won second place in the Nobility Social Impact Award. Sebastian. So the first question, and no one has to feel compelled to answer every question, and you can ask each other questions, and we can just have a conversation that's necessarily no order. But this question will be for everyone. Erica said accurately that we've always had book banning in this country and in Texas. At what point, and we'll start with Paula going down here, at what point did you especially become concerned about the escalation of book banning in Texas?
So we're going to start with easy questions, I see. As a mom and educator, the pandemic hit really hard. At the time, I was working for an organization called IDRA, the Intercultural Development Research Association, and that's where I was the equity director of a national center for assisting districts with really what we would call in legal terms the vestiges of racism. There are still schools that are considered segregated. So I remember very clearly on a Friday, March 6th, we went to spring break. It was my youngest son's birthday. I took cupcakes to school. And the next week was spring break, and we never went back to school. On the 16th of March, that was a Monday, my boss said, take everything home. We didn't know that by Friday we would be doing simulcasts across a 12-state region to help teachers transition. That's what we thought was going to be the big problem, teaching from home. But almost immediately, when people have nothing else to do because they're at home, what do? They get on Google and they get involved. And they think that I honestly think a lot of the parents and school districts thought they were doing the right thing. But they were beginning to see what was coming home. And now I have nothing else to do but become engaged in the same materials that I've ignored from my child's existence. And now I have something to say. I will be very clear when I say this. I'm a math educator, but I'm a curriculum specialist. And curriculum should be left to curriculum specialists. So though it was a very difficult time for everybody involved. But that, to me, was like a trigger point where people began to see more and more what was actually out there, and then you start using your own perspective, your own narrative of what our students are being exposed to. And so I would really say, though we've had it forever, that's where I started hearing the word propaganda the most, was early 2020.
Yeah, honestly, when I started writing back in late 2018, it really wasn't anything that I was thinking about actively. The only thing that I really was thinking about is that I had read a book about a really lovely book that about a queer white boy living in Georgia, and I had the idea of what would it look like if he was a Tejana high schooler living in Corpus Christi, Texas. I thought that this book, which got a movie adaptation, which I also very much love, awoken me to the fact that kids who grew up like me, with families like I have, with names like I have, don't get adapted. And someone should write that book that gets adapted. And for some reason, without a BA, without an MFA, without ever having taken a creative writing class, I thought I could do that. And so I went and did that. But as that book started getting closer to publication in 2021, we started hearing about lists happening in legislatures of these books that are dangerous, that included really prominent titles like Angie Thomas's The Hate You Give, like George Johnson's All Boys Aren't Blue, like Gender Queer, these sort of very minimal amounts of titles that for some reason people use to reflect the broad scope of BIPOC literature for teenagers, of queer literature for teenagers, of especially queer BIPOC literature for teenagers. And people were asking me, because it was really concentrated in states like Texas, of like, what's happening, what's going on, how do you feel? And it was like I decided one night that I wanted to write a book about a boy living, and for some reason people are taking that as activism. And as I tell people, if they want to make my books activism, then by all means they can make me an activist. I have no problem with that. And so I think just realizing that these things could happen, my books haven't necessarily across the board been banned, but I do think that maybe with the prominent ALA Stonewall honor sticker on the front of one of mine. It comes with a lot of really great things, but also like here's a very prominent queer symbol, that is going to be across libraries, and like what does that mean also? I think that it has meant authors, especially authors of color and queer authors, coming together in a way that I can't speak on if it was like that before I started writing, but like I think real community has happened and support has happened for each other. And yeah, I think I'm kind of forgetting the question now. But yeah, I think that like becoming cognizant of it as I've started writing has definitely pivoted the way in which I write, has really made me. When I started writing, I was very much like, is there a seat at the table for another queer coming out book? Is there a seat at the table for another brown queer person at the YA table? And now, no, I am proudly writing at 100 miles an hour of prominently queer, prominently Mexican stories filled with prominently BIPOC characters, because that's what the world needs right now. That's what our teens need right now. And I think just being able to reflect experiences of young people growing up right now, although I could never relate to how it is to grow up right now. I'm hoping just to share in that sense of community, and I think if I can bring some sense of community to young people, then that's a good start.
Okay, so I'm going to start a little bit farther back than Johnny. It was 6 weeks into my career as a librarian. I was a brand new librarian, opening a brand new school, working in a district I had never worked in before. And a secretary comes in, Lucy, you need to meet with the principal. I have a parent on the phone who wants to challenge this book. And I thought, oh my gosh, she's 6 weeks into this? Like I was not even, this was a little too fast for me. So we went through the process that the district has of, what happens when a parent raises a concern about a book, and went through this entire process and met, 2 months later with our superintendent, who was explaining the decision that had been made. And in all of my, you know how it is, right? When you're young in a new job and you just kind of say things and you're like, I probably should not have said that. And my response to the superintendent is, he was saying, we, need to, the parents are advocating for their children, right, when they're raising these concerns. And I said, absolutely. Who is speaking for the children that this book is speaking to? Because most likely those parents aren't at school board meetings. They aren't in the classrooms. They aren't, speaking up or, raising a concern because they're working multiple jobs or they're busy with life. But who should be speaking for those children? And I saw my director, who was sitting right next to the superintendent, and she just had this, her eyes got big, and I thought, oh, perhaps not the best thing to say as a brand new librarian in a brand new district, opening a brand new school. So then fast forwarding to 2020, when everything kind of piled up, having said that, that was 2007. Never heard a single thing about book banning until 2020. And then it exploded. And at that time, I was coming up to my term as chair of the Texas Association of School Librarians. Yay for great timing, I suppose. So that was when when we had the parents taking text, pieces of text out of context, coming up and reading these passages aloud. And if you hadn't read the whole book, of course, they're alarming to hear. And if you don't know the whole story, if you don't understand that the part that they're reading is a sexual assault that is happening, it is not meant to elicit any sort of emotion other than, I can't believe this has happened to this young person. Then it's easy for those knee-jerk reactions to happen. Like, of course, we don't want that, in front of our children. And I will say that a lot of the books that had been read were written for young adults. And when people use, we don't need these books in front of children, that word children brings to mind littles. This book was not written for them, right? It is not meant for that. And as librarians, we know that, right? We know we are selecting books that are appropriate for our age group. we are selecting books that fit within our district guidelines. And so I was hearing all of this. I had colleagues that had been called out and harassed, and personal information put on social media so people could target them. We had legislators doing that sort of thing with our colleagues. And so I started praying immediately, like, please give me the right words to help explain what I need to explain to people. Help me figure out how to protect my colleagues, how to protect my students, how to protect my life's work, and how to protect my colleagues in this life work, which are authors, right? How do we help them and help our students actually with access to information that is life-saving to so many? And it seems like an exaggeration to say that, but as a high school librarian, I have so many students that have come up to me, and they'll just put this book very quietly in front of me. They're like, this is me. That character was me. And it's heartbreaking, and I step away and I cry and I come back and I'm like, I'm glad it was there for you. And we just continue on with that fight, because when I see that young person in front of me, that's when I know it's all of this stress and emotion and work and late nights and planning committees and everything else. That's who I'm working for, those young people. So I'm so appreciative, before I hand this over to Sebastian, so appreciative of this wonderful group of women, Sharon and my blue shirt friends who are in the audience. I have never met a more organized, on fire group of women, and I'm so glad y'all are on our side helping with this.
I've always considered myself a troublemaker. I think my mom can attest to that, considering how much time she spent in principal's offices. So, being a kid, when I figured out that I wanted to be a filmmaker, my dream was just grabbing my camera, being able to just make films with my friends, fun films about, adventures and mystery and horror, stuff like that. And I've always told myself I'm never going to be, those guys up in Hollywood that are always so political, that take their chances up to go in speeches and make political speeches and everything. But the truth is, as I've matured and as I've grown up, I've realized that the career that I've taken very much has given me a responsibility to represent myself and my beliefs in terms of my work, and that includes my political beliefs. And so there is no way that I can avoid it, In terms of the book bannings, I remember sitting in my Texas government class, or my government class, and before my teacher started the class, she told the entire class, she said, I don't know if any of you know this, because you probably haven't picked up a book in the last year, but the library has started to take away books, specifically history books. There's The Life and Times of Martin Luther King was banned. Books on the KKK, on the Civil War, on the Holocaust have been banned. And I think that it is very important for all of you to fight this and to stand against this, because it is your education. Your kids are going to be going to the same school system that you guys are going. They're not going to get the same value of education that you guys are getting. And immediately I went and ran to my film class, and I told my teacher, we need to put this story on the student announcements. We need to put this on the morning announcements. And she said, yeah, there's no way. There's no way. If you want to get me fired, go for it. But so what I did was I just wrote it in my notebook that I have for my film ideas, and I put it away. And then after a while, I picked up the book again, saw it, and I said, this story needs to be told. And I went, grabbed my camera, interviewed all of my teachers, my history teacher, Mr. Castleberry, who's hopefully still working at my high school, because he's such a fantastic teacher. And my literature teacher, and even my the school librarian, who was very adamant, but she helped with the process, and she was so brave, and I commend her for it. And in the end, despite all the pushback and from the district and from my principal, I had to go to her office like 5 times. It was a mess. I finally got the film made, and I was able to turn it in on time to UIL, and it ended up the film ended up being shown in front of students at UT Austin during the UIL Film Festival, and the response was absolutely amazing, and it's brought me here, and I'm so glad to be here. So thank you for having me.
Kind of along the same lines, do any of you consider book banning anything other than a political statement? Is it actually responding to a problem? Anyone can begin with that answer.
Well, I will kind of reiterate the 2007 when I started my career, 6 weeks in, first one, and then nothing until that 14, 15 years later, then this pile of things came on. And when you look at the books that have been targeted, you start to see a theme. And we just need to pay attention. We need to pay close attention to what types of books are being targeted, the language that is being used when people are saying we are protecting our children. Well, which children? Does that include our children who are identify as this group, or does that include our children who have this history or have this race background? And so we just need to pay very close attention to things like, parents' rights. We need to ensure that our parents' rights, that they have a choice of which books that our students can read. And they always have had that choice. I've had numerous conversations with parents in my office who said, can you work with my child to find books that agree with our thing, with whatever guidelines that they have set forth. And of course, I'm never going to push. Libraries are states of voluntary inquiry, right? They are places of voluntary inquiry. Nobody is saying, okay, well, I'm going to say this, but I know I'm actually kind of telling a lie. But I never tell them, you must read this book. But I do say, I think everybody should read this book. This book is amazing, right? So I kind of, it's that way. But parents have always had that option to come to their teacher, to come to a librarian. Even in my colleagues in the classroom, if they're studying, like book clubs in their classroom, or they're doing a whole class novel, if a student wants to opt out of the book, that is an option, and it has always been an option. So be aware of those terms, I think, that are being easily tossed around.
Yeah, I feel like being gathered here today presents the chance to be just bold and very clear and concise about our words. And so I want to be bold and clear and concise in the fact that as it pertains to this book banning movement that is being led by a number of people that one could probably count on with both of their hands and needing not an 11th finger. If you are someone who believes that this movement of book banning is solving a problem, then you are racist, you are white supremacist, you are queerphobic, you are someone who does not believe in history and wishes to revise it. You are someone who believes that there can be an argument in who is not human and who is not deserving of human dignity. Because the fact is that book banning is part of a larger movement that, of course has existed for probably since people from Europe landed onto this part of the world way back when, of who is and is not human. And I think whenever you are removing books that specifically highlight brown and black people, that specifically highlight queer people and about our histories, then you are in a way trying to erase those people that relate to it, those people that can see them in these books as main characters and as love interests, as people who are learning to love and are receiving love back. You are trying to say that they do not deserve to be seen, and therefore you are saying they do not deserve to be seen. You are saying they do not deserve to exist. And when we fight back that, we are promoting empathy, we are promoting solidarity, and these are things we're fighting for, because when you promote empathy, you are promoting humanity. You are saying that even if you're from the outside looking into these books, you are saying that, no, these are human, and this is something that is hugely valuable and worth fighting for, especially right now when you have a young trans boy in Oklahoma dying, and the government there saying no one is at fault for it. You know, we are seeing a genocide unfold before our eyes, and with thousands of kids being murdered, but being told that they are dogs and they are animals. Whenever we are allowing people to dehumanize people, we see that reflected not only in news, not only in culture and political situations, but also in libraries and the books that are and are not being allowed to be seen, and in the students that are and are not allowed to be able to see themselves in these stories.
So when I was a kid, I used to spend a lot of time in the library, and I remember one book that really captured me was a book called Daniel's Story, which is a semi-realistic story based on multiple different accounts about a young boy growing up during the Holocaust. And I remember going up to my librarian, because my friends had told me about it because they had read it, and I was so interested. And I remember going up to my librarian and being like, can I please check out this book? And all she simply said was, I'd love to give it to you, but your parents are gonna have to sign off on it, because it is for it is for middle schoolers. And for me, I feel like that already should be something that is that should be just the rule, you know? Just banning books outright, not giving the children and the parents options to check out books, even though they may be at a higher grade level, or even though they may be on topics that are much more difficult for them to understand. They should at least have the option to show it to the parents and be like, hey, Mom, I wanna this book interests me. Do you think that can you sign this off so that I could get it? And I think most parents would be like, of course, let's read it together. You know, let me show it to you. Let me teach you about it. You know, let me teach you my perspective on it. I feel like a lot of politicians, you know, when they want to criticize public school education, they love to criticize teachers and staff and say that they are indoctrinating children, and that they're not giving parents options, when they are really the ones that are doing that. They are indoctrinating our children.
Oh, so many things. I wanted to go back, because I'm taking notes up here, because I'm like, oh my God, and that, and that. Just a couple things. One, I want to go back to what Ms. Prosper said about, you mentioned Huck Finn. And I remember reading that book in my Magnet English 4 class as a senior in San Diego, California. GT my whole life, and very different environment. You know, the trickle down from Northern California to Southern California, we're all kind of hippies. And like, I never experienced anything like that until in any kind of prohibition until I got to Texas. I had never really understood, like, and I went to an HBCU. And I say this, and I hope it makes sense when I say it. I did not realize how Black I was until I got to an HBCU. Because I was immediately told how Black I wasn't. And that's really difficult to understand if you're not Black or minority. Like, I grew up, San Antonio is just San Diego without a beach. I mean, the influences are a little different, Guadalajara versus RGV, but it's Texas is just very different. And I've been here over the longest time of my life, but I did not experience racism, misogyny, just othering here. Nothing has experienced, no experience was like being in Texas. So I have learned, like, myself by being more in Texas, because in California everything was wonderful and everyone loves each other and it was beautiful. I'm serious. I was like, oh my God, how are you doing? Oh my God. Like, it was so valley, different valley. But when I think back to Huck Finn, I remember very specifically sitting in my class. I could tell you, I could create the set for you if it ever got adapted in a book. I was sitting in the far right-hand corner. My teacher, Mrs. Nevinger, came to me. We were reading Huck Finn, and she had me in this GT group of students, the only, my friends say, the butterscotch chip. Now, I can't even get chocolate chip. The butterscotch chip in class, she had me read a particular passage that used the N-word. Now, my little 16-year-old self did not understand, and maybe she was trying to be progressive in that moment, and I read it clearly, enunciated every word, including that one, and it made me feel some kind of way. And I remember her asking, like, she came to me and she knelt down, and she says, "How does that make you feel?" In front of my entire class. And all I could think of was, she really does not know who she's talking to. Because my mom raised me better than that, so I did not respond the way I really wanted to. But I remember saying, I gave her the definition of the word, because my mother had taught me the definition of the word, in case I'd ever heard that word used upon my person. And so I gave her a very clear definition of it. And then I said, it was used at the time, just like colored, just like Negro, and then all of the other pieces. But what it made me think of, from what was just said, is the indoctrination piece. It's really gaslighting. The political aspect of book banning to change a narrative that speaks primarily, because all the books are primarily around race, religion, sex, gender, orientation, vulgarity, violence, that you could see on cable TV every night of the week. But it made me think of this, it was from the Heschinger, I can never say the word, report. And this is a paraphrase, but presenting our history or current reality only and always in a favorable way is an injustice to our past and a disservice to our students, teachers, and the truth. And that is what book banning is trying to do. So, and when I say it's political, I'm very careful about that. It's across political factions. This is not one or another, it's all of them. Any political magnet that is trying to ban a book, we have to look beyond it, because what they're trying to do is it's not indoctrination, it's affirmation. And what I wrote to myself was like, I remember reading certain books and going, I'm not crazy, that happened to me too. Or I'm not alone, there are others. It's not just me. And that's what books do for us. Or they just allow us to see another perspective, or give us our imagination's flights of fancy. It allows us to think differently and critically and beyond our own circle of experience. And so, like I wrote, I read about topics that highlight other communities, or like I love young adult fiction. Love it. I'm really upset there's no Harley Quinn. I'm so mad that we haven't finished the series. I'm left verklempt. That's one of my favorite words. What talk amongst yourselves? Chickpeas. They're not chicks, no peas discussed. But no, it's amazing that some of the most banned books are also award-winning books. So obviously, there's literary merit. Because I did look that up, and I'm so thankful that a lot of this is in your bags, your wonderful swag bags. But books are chosen by their relevance, their literary merit, curriculum requirements, The reading level, as Sebastian mentioned, I've always read. I read books with my mother when I was in elementary school. She let me read Anne Rice novels before I had even hit puberty. My mom was a different breed. God rest her soul. And I say that she happened to pass away April of 2020 when all this craziness started. So I'm kind of glad she didn't have to see all this. But one of the major criteria for a book being selected is also nowadays is its effort towards diversity and inclusion, equity and belonging. Kids we talk about this all the time. Students need to see themselves reflected in the curriculum they engage in. They also need to see alternate perspectives. They can not only read or learn about themselves. We don't live in society that way. So my husband and I argue about this all the time. He is also in education, special education. But he has some very strong views about what children, and I'm very specific as well, children, young adults, youth read. It can't all, it should be age appropriate, but I think we also have to include maturity appropriate. Some kids are different than others. Like I said, I was reading Anne Rice. I had no business reading Anne Rice at like 10 or 11 because I didn't understand everything about it. It's not like she gave me, what was the gray, shades of gray. She didn't give me that. But Anne Rice is pretty racy. But it's the idea that all of these different themes didn't come out of nowhere. They're reality. They are someone's lived experience. And if we deny that exists, we're erasing people. And so it's not just about, again, the propaganda piece is really the opposite of that. It's really gaslighting us into thinking you're trying to keep me from feeling oppressed as a Black woman. No, you're not. You don't want to read about the history of Black women in our country. You don't want to read about the evolution of oppression against the LGBTQ plus community in America. You don't want to read about the horrible acts of the Holocaust or the slave trade, which is reality. And we can't ignore it. And so the last thing, and I'll pass the mic for a minute, I just wrote, because my title right now is Chief of Student Advocacy. I have to give you a brief explanation of that. When I got to Judson ISD, and I'm not representing Judson ISD today, disclaimer. I'm representing Dr. Paula Noel Johnson of San Antonio, Texas. But my title, and we're the only one in the area that has this position, but the board, 3 or 4 years ago, chose to have a Chief Equity and Diversity Officer. And I applauded them from a distance. I was like, it'll never fly. I work across the South. Every single person in that position ends up being some kind of scapegoat. And as we see in Texas, almost immediately after I was hired, everybody lost their minds. And DEI became a 3-letter, 4-letter word. And I took it upon myself because of my former employer who testified at state legislature. There's a bunch of lawyers that work for IDRA. And we started looking at each other like, uh-oh, they're coming after DEI. That's literally in my title. Maybe we should rethink this. And so I wasn't gonna back down, but I said, maybe we need to change my title, even though it's not K-12 related yet. I was like, I don't want to target on my back or the district, so it became Chief of Student Advocacy. So having said that, something that I say about advocacy, and Lucy alluded to it earlier, well, everyone has, honestly, but advocacy really means being a voice for those who aren't given the microphone. That's what that means, because we talk about, like Johnny mentioned, like being at the table, and sometimes you sit in the back and you can pass a note, but sometimes you're not even allowed in the building. And so an advocate, a true advocate, and I'm looking at this room full of beautiful faces, you are an advocate for the people who can't speak for themselves. And so that means, and I say this and I get verklempt, we have to understand we're not just advocating for the people who look like us. I'm not just an advocate for Black women, or I have 2 young Black sons who are still in my district who I make sure are going to get the best quality education that they possibly can. But I'm also fighting for the rights of our special education students, our emergent bilingual students and migrant students, our students who are in the LGBTQ community, our teachers who are also transitioning and can't be their authentic self when they're in school. Because it's not about me. I'm a cisgendered woman who's heterosexual, and I happen to be a Black woman at the same time. None of that can fall off. Like, I don't wake up and any of that changes, right? But it's my job to fight for everybody, not just the people in my immediate community. And so I applaud you with everything I have in me. I applaud you for being here and for supporting this particular cause, because it's going to take all of us to do this and to just keep fighting a good fight. That's all I can say.
That's all. Powerful. Lucy, last June, coming up on a year, the legislature passed the so-called book banning bill, HB 900, which the governor signed into law. Basically, booksellers have to give points to school books based on their reference to sex. So it's sexually explicit, sexually relevant, and then no ratings. But it's had a bit of trouble really getting enacted. So can you just give an update on where we are with HB 900?
So I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this, but that consumed my life the last year and a half, and I honestly never wanted to think about it again. But HB 900 really had 2 parts to it, and one of the parts was that library collection development policies, those needed to kind of have standards or be standardized throughout the state of Texas. This was not necessarily a bad thing. The school districts in Texas, there's a lot.
Over 1,700.
Thank you, 1,700 in the state. So that's very large, to several hundred schools in a district to 3 schools in a district, right? And so not all of them have the same sort of resources, personnel to, manage different departments and that sort of thing. And so this was an opportunity that I think the Texas State Library Archives Commission took to help those districts that didn't have all of the support maybe that a larger district had. So those standards were okay. I know TLA worked closely with TSLAC to make sure that they were within our professional kind of guidelines, right? Like this, to make sure that we stayed within our guidelines, but also it gave some room for districts to tweak them however they needed to, right, to adapt to their community. And so that part did pass and is in effect right now, ish. So the second part of it was the one that caused the most, I think, concern, and that was with booksellers offering ratings on the books and really restricting what we could purchase as public school librarians. So as a public school librarian, it is required by law, by the state law, that we have a master's degree and that we are certified by universities that provide a master in library science, information science degree. We have classes on collection development, right? We go through training for this. We have at least 2 years of classroom experience. This is something that we know inside and out. HB 900 said, well, we really think the best person to make the decisions on which books belong in the library belongs to the bookseller. So that any bookseller that we use, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Twig, Nowhere Bookshop, or the companies that most libraries use, their employees were now tasked with you need to rate this based on sexually relevant, sexually explicit, or no rating at all. And the definitions were very wonky, I'll say that. They're very subjective. What does this mean? My definition of maybe sexually explicit might be different from yours, or my definition of sexually relevant might be different from yours. Somebody at the Barnes & Noble office, their definition might be very different from, the librarian who is in Abilene, Texas, right? And so the beautiful thing about a public school librarian is that they are in touch and in tune with their community and what their community needs, and what is acceptable community guidelines, right, for them. And so that was what the big pushback was, and there was a lawsuit that immediately came up with the some of our larger publishers came on board. The Booksellers Association, Book People in Austin, Texas, they came and put up challenged a lawsuit or set up a lawsuit, and it's been winding through the courts right now. It's that part of the bill has been. We're in legal limbo right now with that part of the bill. It has not gone into effect. April 1st was when it was supposed to go into effect. It has not. We don't really know where it's standing right now. So librarians and I think this is also really important actually to know, is that there is no required rating system right now because of that lawsuit, right? So it has been put on pause. I think there are a lot of districts that are overcorrecting in the name of HB 900, and so we as citizens, as parents of those school boards, but just as general citizens of our cities, we need to be aware of the language, again, that is being used at school board meetings when they're saying, well, we need to start, to be in compliance with HB 900, we need to start, labeling our books, or we need to start doing these sort of things. And I think there's just a lot of overcorrection. And so it's, again, very important for us to pay attention to what's happening in these what formerly used to be very, very boring school board meetings, to me now have been like, oh my gracious. And so I think that's why it's very important for us to, I will say this, I'm beyond thrilled. I can't even tell you, when I was contacted by Sharon in October, beyond thrilled that this discussion has moved outside of library land and outside of author publisher land, because it's a nightmare that we've been dealing with for the last couple of years. And thank goodness we have the support of so many voices, and your voices are definitely needed, because it's a loud, small group that has created a lot of chaos. And when the majority of us stay quiet, then we get things like HB 900. And we need to make sure that we're staying informed. And I want to kind of talk about this very briefly, but I know you have some literature in your swag bags, but there are organizations. This is the Texans for the Right to Read is a really great organization. It's a newsletter, basically. It's helping you stay aware of what is coming up in school libraries or in public libraries. I will say this, that it starts in the school libraries, and we're seeing it trickle into public libraries, right? There is Montgomery County right outside of Houston. They, in their public library, they have decided if there is a challenge to a book, to a children's book, that the children's librarian should not be on that reconsideration committee. There are a lot of things that are happening in public libraries, again, that are staying quiet. Nobody, pays attention to library board meetings, right? Who would? But it's time to start paying attention to those. So thank you for attending events like this, getting this information out, bringing your friends to the polls, and being aware of who you are voting for and the positions that they take on things like access to information, not just books, but websites that are being blocked, public libraries, school libraries. There's a lot to be focused on. Sorry, I went off a little bit.
No. Paula has a question for you.
Oh, yes.
I have a question for Sebastian. it just made me think, like, something that I try to consider in all the decisions that we make. I sit on the superintendent's cabinet. So there are 7 either chief or assistant superintendents that sit under our superintendent. And something I try to remember in my advocacy mindset is we are making decisions, adults are making decisions for students without their input, most times. Now, we have a superintendent advisory council that is made up of nothing but students, and they meet with him once a month. And so things like that are rare, I understand. But my question for Sebastian is, how, like, even if it's just your school or beyond, not talking about adults, but how have students responded to your film and to this entire scenario?
Can I, before you answer, I want to, because I want to have a question about. No.
Did I jump in? Okay.
No, you anticipate. No. In your film, you go there, and when I say go there, you go to Nazi Germany. So, along with what Paula asked, just what fed into your thinking about going there?
So that's actually a very good question. I feel like in terms of students getting involved with what's going on in book bannings and even more in issues just relating to public education, it's just a matter of just giving them the room, giving them the space to actually speak out, and not just that, but also giving them the tools to speak out, giving them the education to do that. Instead of telling them, instead of like focusing on one curriculum, I think it's a responsibility for teachers and staff to sort of improvise, give discussion to the room. I remember the best moments in my classrooms when I was in high school, and even now in college, is when my teacher goes off script and starts to just starts to ask us questions and tries to get opinions out of us, creates discussion and debates in our classrooms. I feel like when we accomplish that, we are able to invent and create new leaders, new public speakers, new people who can really just make a difference in our world. The Holocaust for me is so interesting because I grew up in South Florida, in Miami, and I grew up in a very, very large, predominant Jewish community. And so going to school, the Holocaust was a very, very large focus. I was so honored and I was so privileged to have the opportunity to sit down and listen to Holocaust survivors, which there are very few of nowadays. I know that I'm going to be most likely the last generation to actually in person see a Holocaust survivor and tell their story. And when I came to Texas, it was a very, very different story because, the students versus my classmates in Miami were very, very different. They were not Jewish. And so the Holocaust was just a very, very small passage, not even a chapter, a very, very small passage in world history. We didn't even spend a day in class talking about it. I was just amazed. I was astounded because it has impacted our world so much. With the book bannings, when I first heard of the book bannings, my mind immediately went to what was happening in Nazi Germany, with the burning of the books, and with the destruction of not just literature, but philosophy and ideas. I mean, I don't know if you guys know this, but Sigmund Freud was Jewish and lived in Vienna, Austria. And he had to run away from his home because he was going to be persecuted. He was going to be killed. One of the first people. They had him on the list, the SS officers in the Gestapo. He had to go to, and so he was one of the first people to leave to go to England. He went to, and that's where he finished his work, and he ended up passing away. And so you think about what's going on now, and you think, it starts with the books, but then what's going to happen? What are they going to start banning next? What are they going to start limiting next? Not just to our children, but to us, to all of us. You know, we should be so privileged to live in a country where we are able to speak our minds on things, where we are able to speak out against our government and say, hey, this is wrong, or hey, I believe that this is wrong. Because not a lot of countries have that privilege. Not a lot of people in certain countries have that privilege. And so I feel like I've answered the question. That's all I have to say.
Very well.
I'm just going to expand a little bit on what Sebastian said, that you know, they spend so little time on the Holocaust, like direct instruction in a classroom. I will tell you that libraries offer things like, well, there's Holocaust Remembrance Day, right? That is a law that schools must address that in school. And so I know as librarians and our colleagues in the classroom, they're like, we don't have time on our curriculum schedule calendar to do it. And so I know several of my colleagues host exhibits in their libraries, right? So again, it's not that it's, you know, we can't force people to acknowledge that or to walk through the library or to see it, but there are so many students that take advantage of that. And so it's another opportunity, right, where the learning is extended in the library, where they might not have time to address it correctly in a classroom. And so also I just want to say that our young people are passionate when they understand what's at stake. And we need to make sure that they understand what's at stake. And so speaking to them and talking to them about these things. I had one of my students who came up to me, and there are multiple examples, again, because of what I was doing last year and things that they had been reading and hearing. And Ms. Podmore, what's happening with the book bans and what's going on. And I had one of my students, she was interviewing me for a video that she was creating, and we had a display up of books that had been banned in Texas. This was part of our Freedom to Read Week is what we're calling it. And I said, you know, I want you to look at the covers of these books, because when I see that this book has been banned somewhere in Texas, I know a student who identifies with this book. And I put it down and I said, that student doesn't have a voice anymore. They don't have somewhere to reinforce their ideas or their thoughts or validate who they are or the experience that they had. And I went down and we went through about 20 of them. And she just looked at me and she said, I never thought of it. I said, these books represent someone's life experience. And we need to make sure that the young people who this is impacting, right? We have voter registration cards in our library. They are never pushed out to people, but they are there. And so many students now have come into the library, like, Ms. Podmore, I turned 18 today. Where's my voter registration card? And like, it's right over there. And you know, you make sure you do good with that card, right? So we, of course, can't, you know, politicize anything. We can't sway them in any way, but we certainly can encourage them to use their voice when they recognize that things aren't the way that they want them to be.
Johnny, have you had any of your books banned or threatened to be banned?
So I can say that it's definitely, but none of my books are at the forefront of like what I guess the circles that are at the center of book banning people are throwing out there. But I have absolutely had, and I think I would first just love to applaud librarians and educators, especially across Texas, who have been so very supportive of diverse stories being present in their spaces for young people. But I have absolutely gotten messages, whether from my website or from social media, from librarians saying that, like, oh, your book came across in our consideration committee because someone had a problem with it, and I really love it, and I really hope that things go your way, but like I really thought that you should know. So I think that in that way it kind of speaks to just the larger sort of situation of, you know, a lot of these book banning committees and decisions happen in a very sort of quiet way, in a way that isn't always publicized, and especially rural communities where, they're just kind of decided by a small number of people, and then no one ever really knows about it. And so I can probably say with assumptive certainty that somewhere out there these books are not on bookshelves because someone's parent had a problem with it. But I think also I've seen, even I think just in the scope of taking it broader than which books have been banned, it's which books are now being excluded, because I've seen data showing that a lot of schools, a lot of librarians are being forced to now reconsider whether or not to even purchase a book because it is centering a person of color, it's centering a queer person, maybe the language inside of it, what might be controversial to some parent. The percentages of what has been, acceptable for purchase in the past few years in the sort of librarian's mindset from what is now not worth the trouble has skyrocketed. And so, I think in considering the list of books that have been banned is great, but I think just putting yourself out there in a way that you can begin to acknowledge books by brown and black people, books by queer people, and begin to realize that these aren't going to be on banned book lists, they're just never going to be on anyone's list, period, because they exist. And I think I would even like to speak more largely in that as someone who is a professionally published author, and especially someone who is a non-white, non-cis, non-straight author, I feel like and I think many in front can kind of agree maybe that the fact that we exist in publishing, we're kind of from day one meant to believe that we're very lucky to be there. We are not necessarily first deserving to be there, we are lucky to be there. And in that way, I have really seen the ways in which publishing does not have our backs at all as it comes to book banning. They are not at all the ones to speak up for us. They are not at all the ones to speak for young people. And I think another sort of percentage and data that comes to mind is the fact that there is a large audience of adults, of millennials who purchase young adult books, and I in no way discourage that. I love my adult readers, just in the young at heart, just as much as I love the young people that read them. But the fact is that I think publishing now has been able to realize they can rely on the money that millennials are using to purchase our books without having to now think about and worry about the young people who we're writing for in the first place. And so, I think there's a huge problem in publishing as it pertains to just existing in a sort of capitalist state, because we are therefore not necessarily, or at least the powers that be, are not thinking about the high schoolers that we write for. They're thinking about the 30-year-old that has the $20 to spend on a hardcover book without worrying about whether or not a teenager can go and afford this book. And I would assume that especially, I write for San Antonio young people, and how many San Antonio teenagers can go and just casually spend 20 plus tax on a hardcover book? This is by very obviously leaving a space that is meant for the young people that we write for. And so, I think that's just becoming so much more evident, and something that I think that authors and community are beginning to realize. And I don't really know how we fix that, because we're kind of as in a capitalist society kind of both consumable but also disposable. And so I think the only thing that really matters to me is making sure that as I exist and as I continue writing, how can I mentor upcoming voices? How can I mentor especially upcoming queer and queer BIPOC voices, and the stories that they want to tell, and the stories that really matter to them that they want to share, especially with young people, because I realize that my existence in publishing spaces is very book per book, and so as long as I have a per book next, then I have the ability to hopefully reach out and carry someone with me.
Lucy, you said a couple of times about and just in reference Lucy and directing the question to Paula, but you said a couple of times that between 2007 and 2020 there were no issues, and I've been racking my brain trying to think what could have happened in the years preceding 2020 where something could have made all this stuff come up, and I just can't think of any events that would have accelerated, exacerbated this kind of thing. But it is also interesting that in 2020 about is when we start hearing critical race theory, and all the ones talking about critical race theory, be it a Ted Cruz or Chip Ward. These are all people who have never used the words critical race in theory in the same month, much less put them together. You know something about critical race theory. We were talking before this.
Yes.
So explain where critical race theory, the role it plays in all this, and not so much coinciding with this escalation in book banning, but basically
The predecessor. Okay. See, you know, I was looking at the clock. I was like, okay, we're gonna get away with not having talked about a couple of things that would make me sleep better tonight. However, as I've been crossing off all the little notes, I was just like pause, like he's not gonna do it. Yes, he did. So I'm going to answer his question. However, I should say yes and. I just wanted to, that last note, there was something Johnny said about the publishers and sometimes even the booksellers, and it made me think about some of our diversity in advertising that is missing. So when we have certain famous clothiers put out commercials or campaigns that are undeniably racist, or seen like just really pushing certain stereotypes, you can tell right then there was no one of color on that particular team. Otherwise it never would have got, like right now there's so many, like what is it, there's a show, they redid Good Times as a cartoon, and they're already trying to pull it. Again, gaslighting. You don't want the stereotypes out there, but some stereotypes really are kind of true in their own way. It's how we judge them that creates a problem with prejudice and all that. But it made me think, in these publishing houses, in the Barnes and Noble upper echelons, how much diversity is there really to fight for BIPOC authors, for female authors, or or smaller publishing houses, things like that. And so there's already a problem in the system when the people at the top don't look like the people at the bottom. We already know that. But what's interesting is something else I wrote down was, you brought it up. So in the time preceding 2020, I'll re-reference Prairie View A&M University, the Prairie View A&M University, where I spent my first 6 years of education, postgraduate, my bachelor's and my master's. I go every year for homecoming. And there was a year that driving down what used to be University Drive was very different because it's now named Sandra Bland Boulevard. And considering that I spent from my 17th year to my 23rd year driving down that same road with the same police officers or same mindset, when I say that that's the first time I experienced racism, was coming to an HBCU where I'm supposed to feel embraced by my community, and I did, by my community on the college campus. But if you know anything about the area, Prairie View sits directly between Hempstead and Walker, Texas. I had never felt so seen and dismissed by a group of people in my entire life. When I'm questioned as to whether or not I have $20 to buy a book, when I'm holding a $20 bill in my hand, mind you, or several, the treatment that I experienced. I mean, I used to call home and be like, what the heck? This is not real, but it was. But it's very interesting that when the Sandra Blands and the George Floyds, when all that was occurring, having to have some really tough conversations with my children, my young black boys, and my daughter, who's now 23, it was really interesting to think when all of that was happening, critical race theory came up. I was in my dissertation program. And as an educator, having to fight and argue with people, not fight, I don't fight. It wasn't even a friendly debate. Critical race theory is not something that we teach in even undergraduate programs, let alone high school, middle school, elementary. If you say CRT in education, they probably mean culturally responsive teaching, not critical race theory. And when you really understand the history of it, again, origin story is a black female lawyer starts noticing a trend in the criminal justice system and how sentences are doled out to certain communities versus other communities. And in my former job, I would see the same effect occurring in school discipline. No school names will be given, but Mississippi, just one of the states, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North, everything from Texas to Florida, up to DC, Tennessee, and Arkansas, those were my states. If you could see a map of the current DSEG cases in the United States, those 12 states look like they have the measles compared to the rest of the United States. For a good reason. We know why. So in all of that, we talk about critical race theory like it's something that we would enact on a daily basis, and it's just not the case. It is applicable when you think about injustice within the legal system, within the school system. But what's so funny to me, and something else I'd written down was, in those prior to 2020 years, we had a leader in office, no names, who used the term, like when these bills were, like the pre-bills, right? But you could see the political movement going towards this. And it refers to that whole presenting our history in a favorable light. It was called patriotic education. Such an oxymoron. Patriotic education that entirely annihilates the history of the country that we're talking about. All the bad stuff. All the bad stuff we want to push aside because it offends, it's a term I use, offends our sensibilities. Whose sensibilities? Because that's something that I need to know about. My grandmother is 100 years old, still living. She was birthday in January, still living. We talk about the Holocaust and slavery as if they were thousands of years ago. But they're not. And so people, like Sebastian mentioned, he may be in the last generation to personally know someone who lived through the Holocaust. But we forget there are still generations of the people who supported those actions. And I never mean to equate the Holocaust and slavery, but they are two tremendously horrific episodes in our history that we can never, ever, ever allow anyone to forget. But we pretend like since they're over, it's done. We have Juneteenth now as a federal holiday. Why are we still mad as Black people? I'm sorry, my sarcasm comes out. But when we talk about patriotic education, it is something that people want to use against us as if our feelings are not valid. But under these kind of terms, when you say patriotic education, that means basically don't say gay, don't say people of color, don't say poor, don't say marginalized, don't say oppressed. But when you think back to the founding fathers, or go further back, before the founding fathers, go back to Plymouth Rock. They are the quintessential example of trying to find a better life, right? That's what we always say. But for all the people who are living right now in 2024 who are searching for a better life, trying to make it better for everyone, themselves included and everyone around them, you want to use critical race theory as like this linchpin almost of why we have the ills of society, when in fact it's the entire opposite. It's to expose the systemic oppression against BIPOC, gender non-conforming people, people of color, all of that. It's very interesting. Again, it's a wordplay. And words are important. And Lucy, thank you for saying that. Words are important. And so critical race theory has everything to do with book bans in an unnatural sense, in that it's one of those, like, when you throw out something that is nonsensical in the context, it just shows how fearful you are about the audience you're trying to suppress. And that is something that I think is very interesting, that our officials are really trying to suppress the voices that have power and trying to make us believe that we don't have any. That's why I keep using that phrase, gaslighting, because that's what really is happening. They're trying to take away the power that we definitely have. So do not be quiet. Just, and really, anytime anyone has a conversation where they try to use phrases, terminology, words, ask them if they can really define it, like how they mean. Like, I have a tendency to go, and what do you, tell me more. I don't argue, like I said, I don't like, but tell me more about how that relates to this particular situation. Challenge them, because you're gonna have to go out there and talk to the people who are not in this room. And I'm not gonna say convince them, I'll just say plant a seed of doubt of why they are trying to push an agenda that probably isn't theirs.
Yesterday at the San Antonio Book Festival, I was asked specifically about book banning and where we're heading, and I was mildly optimistic that there's more of us than them, and we would win. After these last 90 minutes, I'm wildly optimistic that we're going to win because of folks like y'all, and I want to thank each and one, Paula Johnson, give it to her. Johnny Bartaville. Lucy Carter, Sebastian DeVille. Incredible panel. Thank you very much, and thank you for lifting me. And I will turn it over to Marcia Presner to give us a call to action. And again, I thank you to the blue-shirted ladies for all that you've done. Thanks for all of you.
Really quickly, I just want to kind of jump on something that you had mentioned about the language that people use. So when people who are trying to restrict access to books in libraries, they will say something like this: "Oh, these books aren't banned. We're not telling them not to publish it. We're not telling them not to buy it. We just don't want it in the school library." Well, pay attention when they say things like that, because like Johnny had mentioned, how many of our students can drive themselves to a Barnes & Noble or order something online from Amazon to get the book that is no longer in their school library, and they say, well, they can go to the public library. Pay attention, because the things that we're seeing happening in the school libraries are trickling into public. So please pay attention.
Wow. When we put this together, I don't think we even imagined not only the response in terms of people coming, but the absolute stellar quality of our speakers. I just think it's amazing. To Erica Fear, early remarks, to each panelist, to Carrie. Thank you so much. I want to actually embarrass Sharon for a second and thank her for being the catalyst and the organizer for this event. So apparently, so the story goes, last summer, I don't know whether you read or heard, in Coral Gables, Florida, a church who was in Florida, very concerned about book banning, opened up their doors to their members, to the community, and gave out and read banned books. So Sharon took that idea and said, hey, well, you know, since Florida and Texas are kind of in a dead heat as to who could be, you know, who could be worse or better, depending upon your point of view, she thought it would be a great idea to do this. And so don't let Sharon's modesty fool you. She is a force to be reckoned with. Thank you, Sharon. We know that you have a lot of questions and a lot of comments, and what we are going to do in lieu of Q&A now, we're going to direct you all to the Corbell exhibit hall, which is if you go out and to the right. Our speakers have, thank you so much, expressed willingness to go out there with you and talk to them and talk to you, so you can engage. Johnny and other banned book authors are going to be signing books. The Twig Bookshop has a display. You can buy books and have them signed. The Jewish community, this exhibit hall is kind of really cool. We have the Jewish Community Relations Council has a table with information about the upcoming school board election. I think you've heard from all of our speakers that school boards are really important. They're not boring anymore at all. And Northeast has an election, I think it's May 4th. Is that right, Barbara? May 4th. So you can get information about the candidates and their perspective. Also in the exhibit hall, we have displays by the Human Rights Campaign, the League of Women Voters, Vote, Vote, Vote. So check it out after today's event ends. I want to leave with a couple of things. First of all, when you hear about an event like this and you talk about an issue like this, it's easy to fall into despair and concern and frustration. And as I think Carrie said, I am actually much more optimistic than I was before I arrived here. We don't want anyone to leave and throw up your hands in frustration and grief. Rather, we really, really want to get you involved. And so we put together this call to action. It's in your bag, and we'd really like to motivate you. First of all, we want you to get educated as you all are getting educated today, as we've gotten educated. You all came here on a Sunday afternoon, precious time, and took 2 and 3 hours out of your day to be here. We are really, really grateful for that. So you've taken the first step to getting educated. You'll see in this call to action about a half a dozen organizations that provide resources that educate, mobilize, energize people like us. So I really hope that you'll look at that list. On the back of the call to action is the second step, and several of our speakers talked about it, is becoming an advocate, as Dr. Johnson, I think, said. There's a long list of actions that Erica actually pointed out that they're easy. Read a banned book to your child. Read a banned book to your grandchild. Start a banned book group. Donate a book to many of the little free libraries that are scattered around neighborhoods in our city. If you want to become more involved, as Lucy has been in her advocacy work, and as Dr. Johnson has been, write letters, get to know your school board members, write letters to elected officials, publicly testify about your concerns. So, lots to do. We've got a long list. I want to end on a personal note, and I'd like to dedicate this event to a giant among us, Maxine Cohen. Oh. Maxine Cohen passed away 2 weeks ago at the age of 95. She was a long-time NCJW member, and she was one of the founders of the Holocaust Museum, which is, I think, where we met you. Is that right?
The Holocaust Museum is located on the campus of the Jewish Community Center on Northwest Military Highway. Attendance is free. We've got wonderful docents that can take you through the exhibits. So I really urge you to go there when you have the time. Maxine, like me and probably many, many people here, was a voracious reader. She was a champion of freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of religion. As we were planning this event, we kept her up to date, and she was so supportive of her collective efforts, of our collective efforts. She would have been here. During our talks, she sounded the clarion alarm about book banning, and as several of our panelists said, she reminded me and us of the years leading up to the Holocaust when burning of books, banning books by the Nazi Party was part of the history of that era. Books were banned or burned if the authors had Jewish lineage, if they had pacifist sympathies, or simply if their ideology didn't comport with that of the Nazi Party. You mentioned Sigmund Freud. I learned in my reading that Albert Einstein, groundbreaking book about the theory of relativity, technical, scientific, nothing to do with anything but the way the world works, that was banned because he was Jewish. I hope today that we can keep Maxine's legacy alive and continue to work against all forms of intolerance, hate, and censorship. In closing, thank you so much for coming today. We are so appreciative. We hope to see you in the exhibit hall, and carry on. Thank you.